Hi Freedom Fighters, and welcome to this special mini bonusode, because I thought it was important to interrupt the normal flow of our interviews to look at life after the election, because there was certainly a crossroads in the future of the economy and for property investors. And I thought it important, now that the dust has settled, to have a good look at what lies ahead for property, for finance and the economy, and to have a look at what happened, what's likely to happen, and what it all means. Now, it's fair to say that I believe that the result in the recent federal election meant that many of us who are property owners and have an interest in property all dodged a bullet. There's no doubt there was a looming cyclone on the horizon, and we've managed to avert this. And for me and for many others, we've all had a massive sigh of relief. In fact, I was very shocked at the result of the election on the 18th of May. And it's fair to say you would have seen me doing the Toyota jump at the outcome. Now, the National Labor Party have been returned. And while I don't have any affiliations either way, policy impacts on investors is what it's all about for me. Not interested in the political personality politics. But it's fair to say that we really have averted some pretty troubling times. Now, what's interesting for me is that the result was very much despite repeated indications to the contrary over the last 3 years. And it's also restored some confidence in the intelligence of the silent majority. But it also seriously questions the legitimacy of election polls and the abilities of the mainstream media to know what's really going on. Because I keep asking, how could they get it so wrong for so long? But let's not get distracted. Let's stay on track here, because the simple fact is that the election result effectively means no change. We really have averted what was going to be a major tax revolution, with more change potentially than we've ever seen in the country in that regard. So the result means no change to negative gearing, no change to capital gains tax, no change to finance broker remuneration, which will maintain bank competition, no change to trust taxation, no change to franking credits on shares, and no change to the watering down of proposed tax cuts that was going to occur if Labor got in. Now, I guess this all reinforces the old adage that if it ain't broke, then why fix it? And this seems to have been the prevailing outcome. So, on top of no change though, we're also likely to see some improvements in terms of tax cuts over the next few years. Some major infrastructure spend, which will help employment and is always a good thing for property. We've already seen the first of what will be a number of rate cuts, and the really good news is that we're starting to see a potential relaxation in lending policy. So what does this all mean? Well, in really simple terms, the economy and property performance relies on what I call the 3 C's, which is the really delicate dynamic balance between confidence, certainty, and credit. So what I mean by that is that confidence generally is driven by the level of certainty and our access to credit. So from a certainty perspective, it's fair to say that the uncertainty has been removed. There's been a lot of people sitting on the sidelines in property over the last 12 to 18 months. But now we've got some good news on the horizon. And as I say, we're seeing rate reductions together with potential lending policy relaxation. Now, if we look at the credit side, I've always said that property is a game of finance. And with the recent Reserve Bank interest rate cut, it means that money has never, ever been cheaper. But we need to now keep in mind that with the lending policy tightening that's occurred as a result of the Royal Commission, some APRA and Productivity Commission reviews, that it doesn't matter how cheap the money is if you can't get your hands on any. Now, this has meant that in recent years, the pressure by the government on the banks has meant that the reduction in property values that we're seeing, particularly in Sydney and Melbourne, have been the result of a self-fulfilling prophecy where turning off the tap in relation to access to finance means that that dampens demand, which means that property values ease. Now, the really good news for me, which is the piece that we've been waiting for, is that a couple of days after the election, APRA announced that they're putting pressure to reduce the loan servicing rate, which the banks are currently using, which I believe will potentially be the start of bigger things to come. So that will start to see money flowing more freely, and that's really good news, as I'll outline in a minute. Now, if we look broader than that, the economy generally is also going to benefit from the tax cuts. So that's going to mean more money in our pockets. The rate reductions will mean that we'll have less costs because our home loans are our biggest cost. And that big investment in infrastructure projects means good news for property and property owners. Now, the result of that means that these factors in combination mean much more confidence because we've got more certainty, credit's going to start to flow, and this is going to increase demand, which will put pressure on rising values in the short to medium term, but we need to remember that it's not going to be universal. It's only going to occur in limited supply and high lifestyle demand areas where people with strong and growing incomes want to live. And they need to be in locations going through the recovery rising market phase of what I call the S growth curve, or the property clock, which I've detailed in my book, The Freedom Formula. So we need to be focusing on those areas between 6 to 9 o'clock on that national property clock. Now, we also need to remember that 80% of the growth in the value of property comes from the location. So let's now have a relook at the forecasts of reputable independent research houses in relation to where they see the growth of property occurring over the foreseeable future, over the next 2 or 3 years. And I want to focus on independent research houses that spend a lot of money with really integrated algorithms that properly look at all of the dynamics that affect property values. So firstly, if we consider the BIS Oxford house price growth report through to 2021, we see at the top of the pops they think that Brisbane is going to enjoy 13% growth over that period. Both Canberra and Perth sitting at 10%. Adelaide effectively sitting at third with 9%. Then Hobart at 8%. And behind that, we see Melbourne at 6%, Darwin at 5%, and the wooden spooner, Sydney, at just 3%. But to sort of get a contrary view on that, I also want to consider the QBE housing outlook over the same period. And they're projecting that Adelaide will come in top at 12.4% growth. Brisbane very close to that at 11.3%. Canberra coming in third at 10.4%. Then Hobart at 7.9%. Darwin, surprisingly, at 6%, just in front of Perth at 5%. And then again, the wooden spooners, Sydney at minus 1.2% and Melbourne at minus 2.5%. Now, if I had a crystal ball and could guarantee that, I'd be a very wealthy person. And forecasts are obviously only best guesses given the dynamics of the world and our global interaction. But if we correlate these as indicators with the most recent national property clock that Heron Todd White produce, and focus on those areas that are either at the bottom of the market and starting to show signs of recovery and rising values, then the areas that are looking strong in that context are Brisbane and Adelaide. And Perth is at the bottom of the market. So if you're a contrarian, there's opportunity there. We won't see immediate rises, but all the indicators are pointing in the right direction. Conversely, though, if we look at those that have passed the peak and are starting to decline and lose value, then I wouldn't, in the short to medium term, over the next 6 months or more, certainly wouldn't be looking at investing any further in Melbourne and Sydney. And also Canberra is starting to decline. So make your own conclusions in that regard. I would be adopting a borderless approach because it's all about growth if you're looking to replace your income through property over the long term. But I now want to sort of break that down into what does this mean to the various players, to sellers, to buyers, existing homeowners, existing investors, new investors and rent investors if you're thinking that way. And it's fair to say that it's generally all pretty good news. So if you're a seller in the short to medium time, not obviously a good time to be selling property, but if we look at that in the context of those that are looking to sell so they can buy another property and piggyback into further investment in property, either for home or rental, then you might be getting less than you expect, but you'll also be spending less on the new property. So the changeover costs are probably worth considering in that regard. However, if you don't need to sell, I'd certainly be sitting on it for the short to medium term so that you can enjoy some of the growth that's about to occur as a result of that returning confidence, certainty and access to credit. If you're a buyer, well, it's obviously a great time to buy or build. And with money from the banks getting easier to access, we're certainly going to see some upward pressure as far as that goes. And it'll take a while for that confidence to grow. So if you're in a position to be able to buy and you can get the money from the banks, the next 3 to 6 months represents an ideal window of opportunity for you. Now, first-home buyers are also pretty well incentivised, so great time to take advantage of the existing first-home buyer grants, particularly for new builds. And in certain areas, there are pretty substantial stamp duty concessions and waivers that you can take advantage of. There's also the super sacrifice scheme that can boost your savings deposit. And the recent first home loan deposit scheme that's been announced, where you only need 5% deposit plus your establishment costs. And the effective guarantee that the government gives you means that you'll avoid lender's mortgage insurance, which is worth thousands, means that it's a good time to consider. If you're an existing homeowner, well, the good news here is that loan costs are going to be down. So I'd be suggesting that you stay variable on all of your loans and enjoy any further reductions that are going to occur over the next 12 months or more. And also you'll be able to enjoy the upside in terms of property values if you're in the right location. Now, one thing I would note here is that it's become clear already that not all of the banks are going to pass on the full Reserve Bank rate reductions. So if you haven't reviewed your home or investment loans in over 18 months, I'd be making sure you reach out to a savvy finance broker, as in our own experience, our know-how finance team has been saving our clients up to $1,200 a month in reduced repayments because of the competitive offers that are out there, which is effectively equivalent to a $20,000 plus pay rise if you're grossing it up. If you're an existing investor, well, I'll be holding your nerve. I really recommend you don't become one of the statistics where currently over 50% of first-time investors sell a property within 5 years, they lose money, and they never invest in property again. I've always suggested that you see out the full property cycle that lasts between 8 to 15 years to truly benefit from the long-term capital growth, which will see the value of your property double once you've gone through that cycle. So if you've invested for 10 years plus, then don't make the mistake of making a knee-jerk decision based on media scaremongering and fear. If you're a new investor and a potential investor, well, it really is a great time to be entering into the market in those high-growth locations. So if you've been thinking about it, the first thing I'd be doing, though, is investing in yourself. So read as much as you can. Consider grabbing a copy of my book, The Freedom Formula, which you can get from Amazon, because this is going to give you the step-by-step guide on how you can make it happen. I also just want to make special mention of rent vesting, because I still believe it's a really good consideration to combine the benefits of living where you want with rent at a fraction of the cost of a mortgage, while investing in growth property where the tenant and the tax office can cover up to 100% of the cost of the property if you've cleverly structured that. So in conclusion, there are only a very few times in life where collective decisions have the potential to create a major impact on our futures. And the recent federal election was definitely one of those days, as the future of property and our economy as a whole were definitely at the crossroads. Now, the good news is that overnight, the negative mist and storm clouds have parted, the blue skies of certainty and increased access to credit signal the dawn of a really good new period of confidence in property and finance. So just make sure that you're investing in the right locations, your finances are correctly structured, and remember that property is not a part-time DIY project, but it's an elite team sport where you're the owner of your independent specialist team and your only job is to manage your managers. So I hope this has given you some very timely insights and some food for thought. But as I always say, remember, freedom fighters, to dream like you'll live forever and to live like you'll die tomorrow. We'll talk to you next week.